ladies.
Okay, sorry. Oh, okay.
I'm just wondering where action learning fits in all of this, and the development of action learning sets in a workplace environment to help progress an organisation.
Well, plainly there are. I mean, the picture I painted is obviously not one that applies to all organisations. There are plainly certain sorts of sectors, organisations who are operating at the upper end of the market, who've got competitive strategies that are based around relatively high levels of knowledge, relatively high levels of innovation, however you choose to define it, who will want to try and use precisely those kind of techniques. But you won't find many action learning sets in food manufacturing. You won't find it in the UK. You won't find many food action research projects inside hotel cleaning. My centre's done a lot of research on low-paid jobs, which in the European Union is defined as 22%. It's less than half of the median wage. And 22% of our workforce fall into that category. 33% of all women workers fall into that category. For those sorts of people, the jobs have been designed narrowly. The skills can be acquired on the job in less than a fortnight, often in some cases in less than a couple of hours. The employer has no interest in learning anything. What the employer has an interest in is doing that job and preferably doing it a bit faster than they did it last week. And they have ways of achieving that have very little to do with learning and quite a lot to do with simply increasing the quota of hotel rooms that you have to clean in a given shift. So for people at the top end of the sort of occupational hierarchy, yes, that kind of thing is on offer. But I would suspect that if I went into a lot of lower-end Australian workplaces and jobs, I wouldn't be finding much of that kind of activity. So I think this is the problem. In a sense, what we give to people at the top, we ought to be trying to give to a broader population of the workforce, but we'll only do that if we change the nature of the jobs first, or at least alongside efforts to upskill them.
Yeah, look, I was just interested in listening to what you were saying. I just was using this iPad thing here to pick up a couple of points that you raised about dialing into the Scottish Government's website and all the rest of it. I said that the Scottish model is about three things: individual development, responding to economic and employer needs, and creating a cohesive structure. And then went on to talk about Willie Rowe, overviewing all these other places and bits and pieces. Picking up on what you were saying, I can see a lot of what you're saying on the government website. But I think the thing that's missing for me is what's the glue that's binding it all together? That's the thing that's missing.
Okay, well in Scotland, this is very hard to replicate in Queensland unless you've got successionist tendencies here. It's that you've got a government which the Scottish government the previous 4 years until this May have been a minority Scottish Nationalist Party. The Scottish Nationalist Party won a landslide victory that even they in their wildest dreams couldn't imagine. They're now a majority government. You have a government whose main goal is independence, or at least certainly greater independence from England, and in order to achieve that, they plainly have to do things different from England, but more importantly, they have to do them better. Economic performance has got to improve, otherwise there is no chance whatsoever that Scotland will be in an economic position to wave England goodbye. But it's a broader strategy than that. I think that Scotland, devolution of government happened in 1999. It was four national governments in the UK have been finding a way. The Scots have probably been most successful at that. There is actually a nation-building project here that's going on, and that the Scots are starting to say, we can do things differently, we don't have to do it the same way. And there is a significant desire to see Scotland as a country do better, because it's not doing terribly well at the moment. It's looking at the OECD countries and saying, well, we've put in place this huge investment in skills, we're not getting it out, we've got to try other policies. And the curious thing about the Nationalist Party is that what unites them is nationalism. They span an enormous spectrum of different ideological positions, and therefore they're willing to try anything they think will work, which makes them an unusual government to deal with. So what's really driving this is by the Nationalist Project, a stark realisation that you cannot spend your way to victory. The Scots tried it. They tried it in terms of their spending on education and training to a level that they know they're not going to be able to replicate in the future, and it wasn't going to get the results they wanted. So in a sense, they've tried the easy route, and they're now having to try a harder route. And if they don't do that, if they don't improve skill utilisation, then they really understand in the long term their standard of living will start to decline.
But hasn't that already started to happen? I mean, if you look at Ireland, I mean, I'm just looking at Scotland. You know, Scotland's got a population of about 5 million compared with us, we're nearly 30. The similarities are that both countries are a significantly ageing population with very, very, very little natural growth.
Yes.
You know, we're looking at a massive skill shortage in a lot of the not-for-profit community sector areas as mining takes over and as the wage differentiation between the not-for-profit sector and the mining sector sort of becomes even more, what shall we say, inflated. To try and get people that are older to be retained in the workforce, to pay them a comparable wage, and I'm not pushing a sort of an ASU or any other type union home, when you've got these other attractants, an older workforce, shrinking population, somebody's got to give somewhere.
Well, I suppose, again, the ageing workforce has been another thing that's driven Scotland down this route, but it's also something that's driven the Scandinavians. Finland has got a significantly ageing workforce, and a huge part of their efforts around workplace reorganisation and job redesign has simply been about redesigning jobs to keep older workers in the workforce, particularly in jobs which have got any physical demands. But yeah, I mean, Scotland's not like Ireland. Ireland's just imploded. Scotland hasn't imploded, but it recognises it's punching well under its weight, given the skill levels of its workforce. And I think the Scots understand very clearly, like many relatively small countries in terms of population, that there is a stark choice coming. Real wages across, for most of the UK workforce, is dropping and have been since the recession started. We either get onto the low road, in which case we gradually trudge downwards, not so much a race to the bottoms, and we're in trudge for many of the people in the workforce, with all of the social consequences that carries with it, or that Scotland gets itself onto the high road and it starts to become more like a Scandinavian country that can afford good quality social services, reasonable wages for the bulk of its population, and so on. And in a sense, I think the Scots think that there is no middle way. There's no more fudging this issue. And so they've decided that they've got to start making some pretty hard choices around this. And it's not just that they're thinking about this. The OECD is also sending very clear messages around how the OECD expect it or would anticipate that its member countries want to start to think around innovation models. That they will start to want to think about broader notions of innovation. Because if they don't, in the long term, they are likely to be going down all of the league tables, not just the ones around skill levels, but the ones around average income, spending power, quality of life, and everything else that goes with it. I think in the 21st century, given the enormous competitive challenges which are emerging in Asia, India, and so on, countries have got some fairly stark choices in front of them around their productivity levels. And in Australia, as far as I can see, if you knock out mining, your productivity levels are not particularly fantastic. Certainly not in large chunks of the UK. Scotland has got a problem. And I think that's what's driven them to think, how can we do it different? The other thing that's impacting on public services is huge public service spending cuts. They've got to do more with that. So the existing configurations of workforce are all going to be almost impossible to sustain. So that's also driven them to think, okay, how can we do things different and better? And it could be better for some parts of the workforce as well as for the